Hello, everyone. Welcome to our September Lunch and Learn. We're very excited for our speakers, Kim and Julie, today. Looking forward to getting back to the Lunch and Learns after we took a little bit of a break over summer. So um, I'm going to jump right into it. Today's Lunch and Learn is about the career pathways for racialized newcomer women. And this is a pilot project, and it's targeted programming to support racialized newcomer women in labor market integration. So before I get into formal introductions of Kim and Julie, I just wanted to, Jeff and I are going to take you through a bit of housekeeping. The first piece that I wanted to mention is that this Lunch and Learn is being recorded. There's some connection issues. Can people hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you okay. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, this is being recorded, and also at different points throughout the Lunch and Learn, we are going to take wonderful. Glad you can see and hear me okay. We are going to take some screenshots. So if you're not wanting to be recorded or be in any screenshots, please make sure to have your cameras off. Jeff will take us through the next slide.
You are invited. So if you are attending the Metropolis Identity Summit or in Vancouver on October 30th, please join us for a K-Hub, Newcomer Knowledge Hub, wine and cheese. So yeah, it's just a hour or two to get to know each other and develop some potentially develop some collaboration. So it's so if you're planning to attend the conference, go to the website address here or email Jessica to get more information. So we'll pop that in the chat as well.
I'm going to start by taking us through a land acknowledgement. So Immigrant Services Calgary's head office is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So for anyone who's new to Lunch and Learns or new to Microsoft Teams, I was just going to take you through a little bit of housekeeping with the program. So please mute yourself, and you can see on the slide there where the little mute button is if you're not speaking, just to reduce background noises. If you do have any questions, feel free to utilize the chat. You can see the little chat button right there, or the raise your hand function. I know our presenters have devoted some time at the end for discussion. So if we're not getting to your questions in the moment, we are tracking them in the chat, and you're definitely welcome to raise your hand as well. And there'll be some time at the end for questions. And like I had mentioned, we will be taking a few screenshots, and these photos are used for our social media posts, and they get uploaded on LinkedIn and Instagram. And then also, just to reiterate, our sessions are recorded and sent to all registered attendees. So please turn your cameras off if you're not interested in being recorded or being in screenshots.
Yeah, so invite your colleagues and friends. So thank you so much for attending today. And we are, this is the monthly series, so we're kicking off for the new school year and in September, and we have a full slate planned, I think, till February already. And so if you want to invite friends and colleagues to our monthly Lunch and Learns, you can share the link to the registration page. And here's the QR code. You can just snap a picture of that. The registration page is updated regularly, so you can sign up for future sessions using the same QR code works. And the last thing before we get to hear from our wonderful presenters is our monthly poll. So as always, if more than 50% of us today would like a refresher on Gateway and K-Hub, we'll do a quick overview of that. And now I have to find how to launch that while presenting. Maybe I'll stop sharing quickly. There we go. So just take a minute and submit your answer. Oh, the yeses are edging them out, edging this out. Okay, I think we got about half of our votes, so we're going to go ahead with that. Thanks everybody for participating.
Okay, you want to reshare your screen? There we go. Perfect. Okay, so I'll take us through a little refresher of Gateway and Knowledge Hub. So the Gateway platform was conceived to emulate a client-centric approach to supporting newcomers' goals. So basically, a newcomer family or individual arrives looking for information, guidance, or support on their settlement journey. And then they get connected with a Gateway planner who gathers information to create a personalized plan. This plan is guided by the evidence-based social determinants of health model. The Gateway Planner puts together this plan and presents it to the client, and then they obtain their consent to share their information with the agreed upon services and organizations that they're referred to that best meet the client's needs. The Gateway Planner can refer clients to programs and services offered by Gateway partners, primary support services, or agencies and organizations that are not Gateway partners as well. And referrals can be made to places like employment services, family-focused services, or the food bank, just to name a few. And the whole referral process is managed through a database called the Partner Portal. So this means that the entire process can be tracked and we can follow clients' progress and their outcomes with agency referrals. Now, for the Knowledge Hub, this process that's carried out by the Gateway system generates a large amount of data, which is valuable information. So the Newcomer Knowledge Hub, or we call it the K Hub, is creating, basically it's created a repository for aggregated and de-identified newcomer data. So our intention is to use this data to create information and knowledge that will hold value for researchers, educators, policymakers, funders, donors, investors, and practitioners, not only to improve the Gateway system, but also to inform the larger Southern Alberta settlement sector. So we can all understand how we can continue improving our ability to better support and serve newcomers.
Wonderful. Yeah, the K-Hub is a partnership between Immigrant Services Calgary and the University of Calgary Faculty of Social Work. All right, that's kind of our intro to the Lunch and Learn session. I'll just pass it, or yeah, Megan,
I'm
do you
just gonna,
want to
yeah,
do
I'll
the
do a
intro?
quick, just
Okay,
more of a formal introduction for Kim and Julie. So again, they are speaking, their title of their presentation is Designing, Implementing, and Testing Targeted Programming to Support Racialized Newcomer Women's Labor Market Integration. So one of our speakers is named Kim Lair, and Kim is a Senior Research Associate at the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, which is SRDC. She's an economist with extensive experience in impact evaluation, data collection, data management, questionnaire design, quantitative analysis, and research dissemination. And then our other speaker is Julie Rodia, and Julie is a principal research associate at the SRDC as well. And she has extensive experience collaborating with community stakeholders in carrying out evaluations that are evidence-based and feasible in real-world settings to produce useful and relevant results for stakeholders. So much of Julie's work focuses on ensuring the long-term viability of French language minority communities and on improving integration and employment outcomes for newcomers to Canada. So we're very excited for your presentation, Kim and Julie. Feel free to take the floor and share your screen.
Excellent. So I'll start, but Kim's going to share the slides. And I think everyone should be able to see this now. So thank you very much for joining us for our presentation on the Career Pathways for Racialized Newcomer Women pilot project. So I might refer to this throughout as the CPRNW project, just out of habit. And Kim and I are speaking to you today, but there is a much bigger team that has worked on this project at SRDC. And although Megan has already done a land acknowledgement, I just want to add our perspective here. So we just want to begin by acknowledging that the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today, so we are meeting online, and we do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their culture. And in the area of settlement and integration, we also acknowledge colonial structure and the impact that it has on all our work in this settlement area. So before we dive into the presentation, I just want to say a bit more about SRDC. Like Megan said, it's the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation. We are a not-for-profit research organization that was created specifically to back in the day, 30 years ago, to develop, field test, and rigorously evaluate new programs. So we are a mission-based organization, and our two-part mission is to help policymakers and practitioners identify policies and programs that improve the well-being of all Canadians, with a special concern on the effects of the disadvantaged population, and to raise the standards of evidence that are used in assessing these policies. So we work in a variety of topic areas. Kim and I work in the area of immigration and settlement, but I also have colleagues that work in health, Francophone minority communities, skills development, people with disability, youth, K-12, post-secondary education, and more. And what do we do at SRDC? Well, we collaborate with organizations or with governments or foundations or other partners to support their work, and whether that's to test programs through experimentation, like this program, so through program and control groups, through policy research, through program evaluation and performance measurement, knowledge mobilization, stakeholder engagement, or to build the capacity of organizations with things like data collection and measuring outcomes. Kim has put our website in the chat if you're interested. We do work in English and in French as well. So in today's webinar, we will speak about the Career Pathways for Racialized Newcomer Women project, CPRNW. And we are going to speak about how we put into practice targeted programming and GBA+. And we'll share with you some lessons and implications for future programming from the research that we've done over the many years that we've worked on this project. And we'll present also a selection of findings from the pilot. And you'll see why I say selection of findings, just because this project is quite vast. So as Kim has put on the slide here, this project has been going on since 2018. The service delivery component ended at the end of March 2023, but the research is continuing until March 2025. So this project was designed to implement and evaluate 4 models of employment services, which aim to address the needs of racialized newcomer women in their integration into the Canadian labor market. And Kim will go in details on each of these models. So SRDC, we were responsible for managing the project in its entirety, but also for doing the evaluation. We're not service delivery experts, so we partnered with 8 organizations across Canada to deliver these 4 models. So in total, there was 12 interventions that we tested, and our partners are here. So you can see there's some partners in BC, Manitoba, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. And one of these intervention was done in French. So in this presentation, we will walk you through our GBA Plus approach and how that helped us to design and test targeted programming for racialized newcomer women. So here you see this little image. We'll come back to it a few times, but first I'll speak to how we looked at the issues and identified the needs of the target group. So the two first boxes. And so as many of you know, using a GBA Plus lens means that it ensures that in the design of the models and in the implementation of the project, we considered the multiple identity factors of potential participants and how those factors may intersect to affect someone's experience with the program and the results. And when we talk about targeted programming, we mean a program that was designed and implemented to address barriers to integration for a specific newcomer population group. So it's not the same as programming that is available to any demographic. And it's really meant to address those specific needs and barriers of that client population. Next slide, yeah. So as we know, on average, the labor market outcomes of racialized newcomer women in Canada are lower than Canadian-born women, particularly in the initial months and years after arriving in Canada. So there are many potential explanations for these low labor market outcomes for racialized newcomer women. And they're associated with the intersecting identities of being a newcomer to Canada. So some of these listed here are low official language levels, lack Canadian work experience, having their foreign education skills or credentials not being recognized. They may not know about the Canadian labor market. They may not have the networks in place to access the hidden labor market. It's also due to their identities as a woman, so it could be linked to gender-based discrimination or lack of affordable childcare, and it's also linked to their identity as racialized or as a visible minority, such as discrimination and racism. Yeah, so this slide speaks a bit more about what I was just saying. And although these numbers here are from 2016, because these were the numbers that were available when we designed this project, trends are similar in the most recent census. And here you can see that given the fact that a majority of newcomers are racialized, this highlights the importance of this issue in Canada. We also know that job search assistance programs have been shown to be successful at improving job seekers' employment outcomes, and that in Canada, as you know, there's a vast array of job search assistance and employment readiness programs that can vary in time or in content and activities. However, the CPRNW pilot was certainly a first, at least at IRCC, in terms of employment programs or services that were specifically targeted toward racialized newcomer women and designed to address their intersecting employment barriers. So we wanted to build programming that was evidence-based. So to do that, as part of phase one, so which was the design phase of this project, we looked at the evidence. So we did a literature review of barriers for racialized newcomer women and what has worked in the past for similar populations. We also did an environmental scan of programs that were already in place for newcomer women. We wanted to see what kinds of services were available, if there were any gaps. We also consulted with racialized newcomer women to understand their experience of employment in Canada and the barriers they faced and what supported them. And we also held 11 consultations across Canada with stakeholders, including service provider organizations, experts in employment services, experts in programming for women, to understand what was missing and what was needed in terms of employment-related programming. And we presented skeletons of the models that Kim will explain later, and that we had developed based on the background research. And through this, these consultations and this research was really necessary to translate the research findings into practical and promising programs for pilot testing. I'll pass it over to Kim.
Thanks, Julie. So I'll speak to the next two boxes in this figure. And so firstly, given that racialized newcomer women do not all have the same strengths, needs, barriers, and wants in terms of labor market integration, we identified major differences across racialized newcomer women to inform and develop those models that Julie's been referring to of employment services to address at least a little bit more specifically their barriers in finding and integrating into the Canadian labor market. And so we only developed 4 models, which I'll describe very shortly. Each could be customized to meet the unique needs of participants, so even further by the service provider organizations, and even within their organization to specific participants. And so on this slide here, you see the theory of change that we developed for this project for participating racialized newcomer women. And so it's divided here into 3 columns, and really what it shows is how the CPRNW interventions were expected to impact the immediate and intermediate outcomes of participants. And we also have a similar theory of change for the service providers themselves who are participating in the pilot, and Julie will present that a little bit later. And we have one for employers as well that we're not presenting today. And so as you can see, we've categorized these outcomes into kind of subgroups. And in the immediate term, what we mean by immediate is also quite vague. It takes, longer for some outcomes for certain individuals, depending on initially how close they were to the labor market. But we measured immediate outcomes 3 to 5 months after participants joined the pilot, and that really depended on the specific intervention they had joined and how long it itself was. And then the intermediate outcomes were measured at 2 points in time, 1 3 months after those immediate ones, so 6 to 8 months later after they had joined the pilot, and then at the 1-year mark. And so we're still, in terms of fully integrating into the Canadian labor market, it may take more than a year. We realize that. And so the longer term outcomes are really outside the scope, unfortunately, of this analysis. And so we're really focusing here on immediate outcomes. And so for participants in the immediate term, we expect their participation in the programs to influence their career adaptability. And so, their ability to successfully look for a job, to know where to find that information, to feel confident in having a resume that would get them a job in Canada, for example. We also have work placements for 2 of our models. They involved work placements, so some Canadian work experience through that. And then both in the immediate and intermediate outcomes, we have a category that we've called beyond employment. And so although the main goal of this pilot was to help racialized newcomer women successfully integrate into the labor market, find and keep good jobs, we did expect some outcomes beyond employment, either due to the program itself or due to them finding this employment and that leading to other outcomes such as increased self-confidence, more, larger social networks, employment-related social and employment-related networks, increasing in their skills by participating in the programming, for example. So those are all outcomes that we're trying to measure immediately after participants have participated in the program. And then a little bit later, as a result of those changes in immediate outcomes, we have our intermediate outcomes, which are primarily employment. So finding employment, the type of employment. So was it, full-time, part-time, the number of hours, the earnings, and then whether or not it was commensurate with their education and their experience before coming to Canada. We also measured job quality, job satisfaction. So all of these measures of really a good job. And then beyond employment, again, participating in the program and finding good quality employment should lead to increased confidence, career networks, maybe sense of belonging in Canada, improved mental health, hope, life satisfaction. So there's a lot of outcomes, and that's, I think, why Julie initially mentioned that we're going to look at some of them today. And so I think we've said enough times, we're going to tell you about the models. Here they finally are. And this is on a graph or a figure of from initial distance to the labor market. So, if you imagine there's a continuum where people are at different initial distances from the labor market when they come to Canada or when they join this pilot, which may be, a few days after they arrive in Canada, or for some, a year or two after they've arrived in Canada. And some are closer than others. And so we have 4 models. They're labeled A to D with those closest to the labor market, Model A, and then Model D designed for those furthest initially away from the labor market. And then their names are here, but I'll really go into detail in the next slides for each model. But really, they differed according to who they targeted, the services they provided, and who was offering those programs. So here's the first one, Model A. Again, we refer to it as partnering in workforce innovation. And it was primarily targeted to newcomers who were ready to be employed or very close to the labor market. And it was a demand-driven approach that used a recruitment specialist working for the service provider organization to work directly with employers with significant workforce needs to match them with women who have the job-related skills, career interests, and abilities to perform the job. So really, the main activity for this model was job matching. So, a newcomer joins the program. They are, in finance. They want to find a job in finance, and so the employment specialist or career counselor working for the service provider organization is matching them with a job. Of course, even though they're very close to the labor market, they may have required some help in improving their CV or building their networks, some counseling. So there are also needs assessments, both of employers and participants, some workshops if required, job matching, which I said was one of the main ones, and then ongoing individualized support. And this could have been before they had found a job, but also, after participants had found a job to improve their job retention, job promotion, progress. So deal with any issues they might be facing in the Canadian labor market. And so generally, you'll see when I mention the other or introduce the other models, Model A is probably the shortest in most cases. So it was implemented by 2 service provider organizations, one who implemented the program in French, Société économique de l'Ontario, and one in English, World Skills Employment Center, so both operating in Ontario. And SEO did not do group training. It was really individualized support with a few virtual group workshops, but mainly individualized support. For World Skills, there was a group training, 8 days, and then continued support. Model B, so that's second kind of distant from the labor market, we refer to as navigating the Canadian labor market. And this model offers support in the development of a clear career plan based on a thorough assessment of participants' skills, provides them with opportunities to connect with potential employers. And one of the key features of this model is that it applies the essential skills, now Skills for Success framework developed by the Government of Canada. So one of the key components was employment readiness training, including the development of a skills portfolio based on those essential skills or skills for success, and based on their intended occupation. Participants may have also participated in essential skills enhancements if it was deemed necessary or by a skill assessment. So if somebody wanted to go into an occupation and their essential skill was lower than it was required for that specific occupation, they may be given resources to improve that essential skill. So it wasn't, the training itself didn't provide essential skills enhancements. They were referred either to other services or given material for that they could use to learn and improve on their essential skills. And then also there were these employer connections. So the target population here was women who were ready or almost ready to work in Canada. And given that most newcomers to Canada are very high skilled, given who immigrates to Canada, again, for this model, the participants were generally very, very high skilled, very educated. This program was implemented by 5 service provider organizations in Ontario, in Nova Scotia, and in British Columbia. This was generally a bit longer of a training, although there was some variation you see in this table. So some had 5 weeks of training, some 2 weeks, etc. And so, and then plus the skills enhancement only if needed. So again, very customized based on what participants needed, what occupation they wanted to go into. Model C, if we're getting a little bit further from the labor market for the participants when they join, is really a demand-led approach. So our service provider partners determine specific sectors that had a high demand for labor, and they partnered with those sectors to develop training that would be appropriate to help the racialized newcomer women enter those specific sectors. And so really the target population were women who identify as racialized, who do not have multiple barriers that would prevent them from participating in employment services, but are otherwise relatively distant from the labor market. And of course, they had to be interested in the sector that was being offered by that specific service provider for that intervention. And so this model was implemented by 3 service providers. 2 actually you had the same sector, which was senior care. And so a participant knew from the beginning that this program was for senior care. And if you were not interested in working for senior care, this was not the right program for you. At Opportunities for Employment in Winnipeg, they actually had several different sectors in which they work. So they had customer service, like customer service representative, retail and hospitality, personal support workers, so in healthcare, manufacturing, and then actually they added 2 more during the project in administration and also working in childcare centers. So the key component here was this employer engagement, again, similar to Model A and the job matching, really directly providing a work experience and a job to participants in this sector. There was also employment readiness training if needed. So Achieve and Mosaic, as you see here, the 2 organizations that implemented the project in senior care provided 4 weeks of training to all participants. For Opportunities for Employment, it was very much based on the individual. If they did an assessment initially, and if it was deemed necessary, they would participate in training. For their training, it was actually mixed with other participants at OFE, whereas Achieve and Mosaic, it was just for the Racialized Newcomer Women project together. And the milestones component, which I haven't mentioned yet, but is in the name of this model, is really a way for each organization to track the milestones of participants even before they move on to finding employment. So a way to measure success throughout. And this figure here comes from Opportunities for Employment and what they developed to measure the milestones leading to success for each participant. And then they track those milestones to see if there were any, blockages for many participants, to track each individual participant to see if they needed to, provide more assistance or if something was happening. So there was that initial assessment. And then they were looking at increases in skills over the programming that they had received. So they had measures for that, whether or not the person participated in a work experience or a technical training. And then whether or not they were matched with employment, whether or not they successfully completed a probation period, and then really long-term success at the job. And so these were their specific milestones, and Achieve and Mosaic had different milestones. Okay, and the final model was for participants who were most distant from the labor market. It was actually designed for refugee women, is building Canadian work experience. So it was really designed for refugee women who had no previous work experience in Canada. And it was a paid short-term employment to assist them in gaining meaningful Canadian work experience, so their first Canadian work experience. And it aimed to enhance their employability readiness, their skills, their workplace culture, or their knowledge of Canadian workplace culture and networks by providing this Canadian work experience. So all of both of the models, both of the service providers who implemented the model, the YWCA in Vancouver and iSense in Halifax, provided employment readiness training first to all participants, and then there was a paid work placement, which involved a 75% wage subsidy to employers hiring the participants. Not all employers actually took the wage subsidy. Some were very happy to hire participants without the need of the wage subsidy, but many did take it. And then ongoing individualized support as well. And in all of these programs, there was really a lot of individualized support that was participants really appreciated. And the work placement, was 12 weeks long. Okay. I think I'll pass it back to Julie.
Thank you. So I'll speak to this last box here. So as I mentioned previously, SRDC was also responsible for the evaluation of the project. And we took the GBA plus, the gender-based analysis plus, into account when looking at the data. So we'll go into the 4 lessons that we have for this project. So the one thing that we saw is, so lesson 1 is targeted programming for racialized newcomer women that considers their intersectional identities, can effectively address their complex sets of wants, needs, and barriers, and improve their labor market integration. So one of the things that we saw was that a GBA plus lens highlights that racialized newcomer women are quite diverse as a population with complex wants, needs, and barriers. They have many intersecting identities and roles in their families and communities. And although most settlement services and programming is open to all newcomers, a one-size-fits-all approach to services does not necessarily address the issues of access and outcome inequality related to that intersectionality. And as we can see here, targeted programming is valuable for equity-seeking groups like racialized newcomer women, because it enables service provider organizations to consider discrimination in the labor market and in society more broadly when designing and delivering services. So one of the things that we found with this is that by bringing racialized newcomer women together, it created a safe space where women felt comfortable learning and sharing personal stories and experiences with the other women and staff. So we say a safe space and a brave space for them. And as Kim mentioned, most of the service providers deliver the programs in cohorts, and this intentionally brought women together and friendships were formed. Participants in the program shared similar settlement journeys and experiences, and they were able to share that with one another, which helped them to gain confidence in themselves. So here is just a snapshot of the participants. This is not the final data here. This is as of December 2022. So the interventions recruited over 2,200 newcomer women who identified as racialized into the programs. And as you can see here are some characteristics. So for example, the average age was 36 years old. Most of them were married or in a common law relationship. 45% had been in Canada for less than 12 months, so almost half the sample. 61% had children under 18 living at home, but only 34% had children 0 to 5 years of age living at home at the time. The participants were from 100 plus countries coming to Canada. Next slide, Kim. and they spoke many languages. So 53% of them most often spoke English, spoke another language other than English or French at home, sorry. 42% English and 5% French. And I mean, the French is by design. There's only one intervention that where people spoke French, but there was a few French participants in the other programs. Most of our participants had some sort of university degree, with 45% of them achieving a postgraduate degree, so quite educated as our newcomers coming to Canada. And in terms of work experience, 88% of them had established work experience outside of Canada. 47% had work experience in Canada, and most of them, so 79%, were unemployed at baseline. So when we say at baseline is when we did the survey before they started the program. So as you can see, quite varied, and you can imagine all these identities intersecting with one another to have quite diverse clients. So some of the implications here of this are that it allowed us to pull out what are some of the important elements for successful targeted programming. So given how diverse racialized newcomer women are, the design of programming should consider the intersecting identities of potential participants. And given that, within programming, services should be customized to each participant. So in all the programmings, there was most of them had individualized support, I think all of them, in addition to some group training. And that really enabled service providers to respond to the varying needs and wants and barriers of each participant. So during that time, they were able to really support them in helping them to reach the employment goals that they had, because all the participants had different employment goals based on where they were at in their life. The service providers also require flexibility to respond to the specific needs of their clients. So the flexibility in terms of adapting the program to their clients, but also just flexibility in getting people to participate in different ways, which lead us to the fact that potential clients with differing identity factors require different services. So more than one programming option should be made available. And in addition, a mechanism for determining appropriate programming is a potential way to go, because newcomers are unlikely to know which program or service is the most appropriate for their situation. And so a one-stop service point, for example, could be a way in having this work. Right. So while there's a lot of positive for targeted programming, there's definitely some things to take into considerations. So some of the drawbacks, so for this pilot, because it is a research pilot, it was difficult in terms of recruitment, because it means that it's like racialized newcomer women who are closer to the labor market, who are interested in this program, for example. So that really narrows down the number of potential participants. And we let participants self-identify as racialized or not. So that really led to some recruitment challenges. It can be costly to have targeted programming because you may need to have many different programs for the different target groups, and it may be expensive to run and maintain. You have to think also that participants might be missing other experiences and perspectives. So because if the group is too like-minded, participants may experience lack of awareness of other experiences and perspectives. And the last one is that racialized newcomer women in this particular project, because it was funded by RCC, is a very specific group. So it does not include Canadian citizens. And there are women who did not identify as racialized, but who may have faced some similar barriers as well. Next slide. And I will pass it back to Kim.
Thanks, Julie. So as we've already mentioned, SRDC was responsible for overseeing the implementation of these 12 interventions, but also of completing the evaluation of CPRNW. And so I'm going to go briefly into the research design. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them in the end. But we actually had 3 research designs depending on the service provider and the intervention. So 6 of our interventions used a randomized control trial, meaning that there was a randomly assigned comparison group who could act as a counterfactual for those who received the program. So we would know on average what would have happened to participants had they not participated in the program. So that really allows us to identify average impacts of the program. For one service provider, or intervention, we had a quasi-experimental approach. We didn't have a random comparison group, but we did have a non-random comparison group there. And then for 5 of the interventions, there was no comparison group. They were generally had smaller populations, so of women who they were helping, and so there wasn't really the sample size to have a comparison group. So we deem those proof of concepts, and we're really just looking at changes of outcomes for participants in those interventions. And the one limitation with that is that we don't know what would have happened to the participants without the program. You know, some probably would have found employment. Would it have been as good quality? Would it have been as quickly? We don't know. And so we can't attribute all their changes to the program. We can just speculate what may have that. We can say what happened to them. We can speculate that it was at least in part due to the program. And as Julie's mentioned throughout, that even the whole project was guided by a gender-based analysis plus lens, including the analysis. And so in this slide, we show you the different characteristics that we specifically took into account when doing the analysis. There are many more. It's just that we couldn't look at all of them given the sample size of just over 2,000 participants we had. So we wanted to see if the program had different impacts on participants who had been in Canada for longer, those who had previous work experience in Canada compared to those who didn't, those who joined the pilot while they already had a job, so maybe they were working part-time or they were underemployed, their skills weren't being utilized, and so they joined the pilot, versus those who were unemployed. We also looked at immigration class, so those who came as economic class principal applicants compared to others. One of the major factors that we've talked about a lot over the course of this project is the barrier to employment for women with young children. So the difficulty in finding childcare, affordable childcare. And so we looked at those who had children under 5. And as Julie already mentioned, only 34% of our participants had children under 5. Which may already indicate a barrier to participating in the program, or that they weren't interested in the program because they knew they wouldn't be able to find childcare while they were employed, so they weren't looking for employment necessarily. So that was really an important one for us. We also looked at age, confidence in English or French, which also influences labor market integration, of course, essential skills for those Model B participants who worked with the Essential Skills Framework. And then one of our immediate outcomes in the career adaptability heading was career decision-making self-efficacy. And we wanted to see if those who had higher initial career decision-making self-efficacy may have had larger impacts or lower impacts of the program. And so really, we look at average impacts and average changes in outcomes of the interventions, and then also at the subgroups where possible. So we had surveys that I've sort of alluded to. Julie mentioned a baseline. So we have a baseline survey. We have follow-up surveys that I've mentioned. We had administrative data from from each service provider, collecting data on participation. We conducted focus groups with participants, interviews with staff. We also did a photo voice project with some participants and staff. So there's a lot of data that was being collected, and we will very briefly present some of those results. But all of our findings are in reports on our website, which is at the end of this presentation, and we'll put in the chat as well. So here I'm just going to present some really broad findings. I'm going to, for each of those categories I showed earlier in the theory of change, we'll talk about the average changes and then the gender-based analysis plus findings, so those subgroups. And the first one here is career adaptability, which we define as the psychosocial resources to cope with changing work and work conditions. And overall, we find important impacts of the programming on career adaptability that are above and beyond the improvements experienced by the comparison group. And these are really crucial precursors to finding employment that's commensurate with skills and experience. So in the immediate term, we would say that on average, that's a success of the program. We find that in those three measures of career adaptability that I had noted earlier, and that's really, part of the training involved resume writing, mock interviews, mentorship, networking opportunities. All of these aspects were really highly valued by participants and designed to improve their career adaptability. And for the GBA plus, for some of the interventions, participants who were initially furthest away from the labor market, so with lower career adaptability initially, show larger improvements. But for some interventions, the opposite is true. So it really depended on the intervention. You could see it might be easier to show improvements if you have a low level initially, which might explain that finding for some interventions. The opposite, you can also imagine why that may be the case. For employment, one of the main outcomes or intended outcomes of the program, we do see that the pilot was effective in improving labor market outcomes. That includes the likelihood of finding employment, the hours of employment, earnings, the likelihood of having commensurate employment, job satisfaction, and job quality. And here we see participants initially closer to the labor market and those with fewer barriers, including not having a young child at home, seeing larger increases in finding employment. Again, that's not unexpected, especially given the short time period for which we're looking at employment outcomes, so within 1 year of joining the pilot. And then beyond employment, we looked at many different outcomes, and we do see important changes in outcomes in skills, social capital, and wellness, which may be just as important as employment in a participant's settlement journey in Canada. We do find some differential changes. They're noted in our reports, but there's no clear pattern amongst them. And so I just want to next tell you a little bit more detail about our comparison group. Apologies if this figure or graph is a little bit complicated and detailed, but it's really important to understand what we're actually able to identify with this evaluation. And the most important thing to remember is that our comparison group here, we're not denied all services. So they were able to access all other services that the service provider provided besides the CPRNW intervention, and they could also go to another service provider and take any of their programming. And so we're not comparing receiving the CPRNW intervention to not receiving any interventions at all. And so it really means that what we're finding here is that incremental impact of having this targeted programming for racialized newcomer women over, above, and beyond the regular services that are being offered to newcomers. And so here we just look at the group training hours. So we asked both program and comparison members at the time of the first and second follow-up surveys how many hours of training they had done since they joined the the research or the pilot in different categories. So the orange, for example, is career development services. Purple is essential skills. Light blue is work-related or job-related training. Soft skills is in dark blue. And here we divide the graph by organization that has a comparison group. And what you can see, or at least I'll tell you what you are seeing, is that the program group does have more hours of training than the comparison group, although clearly the comparison group does not have no hours of training. They're in the hashed kind of part, and the solid bars are the program group. And the program group tends to get them earlier. So at the time of the first follow-up survey, for each intervention, the program group, for most interventions, the program group seems to have more hours of training compared to the comparison group. And then sometimes the comparison group has more hours at the time of the second follow-up, which is like the next 2 bars for each organization. And sometimes the program group still has more. But so overall, what we're seeing is really just to contextualize the findings is that the comparison group are getting a lot of similar services. And so we're really looking at those impacts above and beyond other services that, that newcomers are receiving. And here's just another figure from one of our reports showing the summary of the impact. So for those model interventions that had a randomized controlled trial evaluation design, we see these improvements in career adaptability 3 to 5 months after participants join the program and 6 to 8 months after. We actually see a little fall in the third follow-up survey for job search self-efficacy. And that's not a fall necessarily, like their job search self-efficacy got worse. It's just that maybe the comparison group caught up and did a little bit better by that point. We also see in terms of employment these improvements. And again, the results I'm showing you are from that data just until December 2022. And so we didn't have as much data for the third follow-up survey. We're only presenting results here that are statistically significant for those who are interested in research. And so we have more, a larger sample now to look at these third follow-up surveys, which is what we're doing until March 2025. And then beyond employment, actually, we do see some increases, some positive impacts on network, strength, but actually like in confidence in English, we have some mixed results, and we don't know for sure what's causing them. You might imagine that someone who's assigned to the comparison group might, instead of having joined the program, took a link class, and so maybe is improving their English that way, and that's why their confidence in English has gone up. Or maybe someone has found employment and it's their confidence in English, not their actual English. They've joined the workforce and now they thought their English was okay and now they're a bit worried about it. So there's many possible explanations, but we don't really know why that's the case, but we see it at all 3 follow-ups surveys. And so that was lesson 1. Briefly on lesson 2, our conclusion is that models that connect newcomers with employers, which all of our models did to a certain extent, can be highly effective, but require deep and meaningful partnerships between employers and service provider organizations. And the scale of these partnerships and systemic biases in the labor market limit the success of these models. And I would probably say that this was one of the most difficult components for our service provider partners to implement. Employer engagement was very challenging for most service providers, especially for those who didn't have very much experience in engaging with employers before they joined the pilot. And many employers who they reached out to remained reluctant in hiring newcomers. It really takes time and a dedicated staff to build trust and partnerships with employers when there's high turnover at employers, but also at service providers. Those relationships that have built may break down and need to be reformed. Staff who don't necessarily, at SPOs who don't necessarily speak the language of the private sector employers may find it difficult to connect with them. And so it was really quite challenging, especially reaching beyond employers that already understood the value of newcomer talent. So really they built stronger relationships, often with employers that already hired newcomers, that already had relationships with service providers, but going beyond that was still challenging. And then once participants entered the workforce, many did experience racism and discrimination in looking for work and in the workplace. And these models were not intended to were not designed to change employers. Some employers, as part of these models, participated in diversity, equity, and inclusion training, but it wasn't the participants of this program were newcomers and not employers themselves. And so those systemic biases in the labor market still exist, are still extremely problematic, and definitely limit the success of these models. And I'll just present one graph here. We asked participants, had they experienced racism and discrimination in job search and in the workplace since they arrived in Canada. 37% responded yes, that they had. And in this figure, you can see the different types of racism and discrimination they may have faced, and they may have faced multiple. So this was, select all that have applied, and participants could select more than one. So unfair performance reviews, colleagues treating them differently, denied a job promotion, etc. So it's definitely an issue. So in terms of implications. Hello? Yeah, we can hear me. Okay. In the short term, the delivery of demand-led employment programs should leverage the capacities of SPOs with established networks of employers already. In the long run, resources, including time and funding, should be provided to SPOs implementing demand-led employment programs to enable them to further develop their capacity to engage meaningfully with employers. We think it's unrealistic to ask service providers who have never done this before to effectively be able to engage with employers right away. This takes time and resources that are required. But what we did find with Model C specifically was that a sector-based approach is an effective way for service providers to begin meaningfully engaging with employers, because they can focus on a specific sector, engage with employers there, develop training specialized for that sector so that their clients are prepared for the sector. And it's one way to start employer engagement in an effective way. Of course, the limitation is that only clients who are interested in that sector would be matched with employment opportunities. And so it takes time to build capacity in multiple sectors so that you can help more and more clients who are interested in working in different sectors. And so we also identified an important gap related to this lesson, which is, first of all, more research is needed to understand this employer hesitancy in hiring newcomers, and employers need to play a more active role in enhancing their understanding of the value of newcomers, and to take concrete actions to ensure opportunities are accessible for newcomers. Even still, a lot of the onus is put on the newcomers themselves or the service provider, and not on the employer to change. And so refocusing on what employers also need to do, we think is an important gap still existing. And these systemic biases, specifically racism and discrimination in the labor market, must be addressed. And I'll pass it to Julie.
So in terms of lesson 3, what we found is that the design of an effective program for populations with complex needs can be strengthened by both purposeful stakeholder engagement and pilot testing. So I've already spoken about the purposeful stakeholder engagement that we did to develop the models and to ensure that they were adapted to the local context and to the needs of the target participants. So I'm not going to spend any time here. But if we go to the next slide, what we found is that testing a new intervention is an opportunity for stakeholders to learn what programming works and for whom. And when I say pilot testing, I just mean testing on a smaller scale before implementing broadly. So, and we think that the development of programming should include a funded design phase, such as this program. We know that we often design programs without funding, and then we apply for funding. But having that funded phase that would start by using lessons from research and evidence to inform stakeholder engagement and to make sure that the program that we're developing is meets the needs of the population that is being targeted. I've also mentioned the pilot programming should allow for flexibility, and it's really important, I think, we found in this that by pilot testing potential models, it should be adapted by participating exposed to both the local context and to their clients, but that there should also be flexibility during piloting, both in terms of how the funding is used and in terms of program design, to adapt to make sure that it's necessary, that the learnings that happen throughout the project are immediately integrated into programming to improve their effectiveness. So you learn something, and then you're able to adapt your program. And in some ways, many service providers do that already, but you're not necessarily able to change major components of the project. And we also think that a GBA Plus lens should be used for the design, for the delivery, for the evaluation of programming. And as we're wrapping up here the presentation with lesson 4, I'll speak a little bit to date, we've spoken about how the direct CPRNW services affected program participants. So we looked at their changes in their employment and other outcomes. But this pilot also had indirect services, which really were aimed at enhancing the capacity of SPOs in order to achieve better participant outcomes. So what we found is that service providers' capacities to meaningfully serve newcomers can be strengthened through implementation, research, and a community of practice. So from the start of this project, SRDC worked with the SPOs to develop each of their intervention within the context of the research design and service innovation. And while the SPOs had different initial levels of experience working with racialized newcomer women and varying capacities to design and deliver the key program components of the models, we continued working with them throughout. And there was also an opportunity to talk to others who were implementing similar models. So we brought folks together through a community of practice, through webinars, through a series of forums where we brought people together to learn and share from one another and to develop their skills and expertise together. So in the next slide, we'll see the service provider theory of change. So we had a theory of change for participants, but now this is the same, but for the service providers who were delivering these models. So as you can see here, we had one immediate outcome, which was to build the capacity. So to increase their capacity to deliver demand-led and or essential skills-focused employment services, their capacity to deliver specialized programming for racialized newcomer women, and to share their learning with other service providers. And in the intermediate outcomes, we had to establish a community of practice where networks of practitioners supported each other in their work, where they would share best practices and they would collaborate to identify solutions. And I just want to give some examples of the community of practice and how it was done. So one of the things that happened early on in this program was COVID. So at the beginning, so when these programs were designed, they were designed to be all in person, as most services were. And then, so when COVID happened and we brought this community of practice together, to share how they were changing their program, how they were putting them to be virtual, and what was working and what was not. So in terms of tools, in terms of how to change the design of the curriculum or anything like that. We also brought folks together to speak in forums, and from there were built some collaborations for other programming as well. So service providers from across the country who had similar interests partnered and led programs in the future after this. And the third one here is targeted programming for racialized newcomer women. So a goal was to have enhanced employment-related services that respond to the needs of racialized newcomer women. And most of the service providers did continue their program. They were able to get funding to continue this targeted programming. And in terms of implications from lesson 4, so we think that resources should be allocated to foster a community of practice to support capacity building amongst those who are delivering similar services. I know that sometimes there is competition, but what we saw from this was that there was high engagement from practitioners across most organizations in participating in this and in just being able to share the challenges or what had been working well with others who were doing similar work. A community of practice benefits from having an external organization that supports the group in working together. So although SPOs may and will do things differently, having a common goal helps to connect the group and focus the conversation. And we think that having a research organization or just a mandate to do the evaluation of the project really helps with the pilot because you're able to learn and to provide responsive evidence-based programming. And we think that service providers organizations should be supported to form partnerships with researchers, but to also develop their own capacity in evaluation and research to be able to do some of this outcome collection on their own so that they go beyond output reporting, so to really measure outcomes that's so important for learning and continuous service improvement. And I will let Kim wrap this up.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, so just quickly, I'll wrap up with these 4 overall conclusions from the pilot. So firstly, we are already pleased to see that what we found was that targeted programming is important. Specialized programming using a gender-based analysis plus framework has worked well in this pilot. We were able to show that using the evidence from the evaluation. And we were pleased to see that an increase in the focus by RCC on these 2 topics. For example, in the recent CFP, we were pleased to see the mention of the CPRNW pilot and the focus on targeted programming and GBA+. We also, as I mentioned earlier, that successful newcomer labor market integration really requires a better understanding of this employer hesitancy. It involves increasing capacity of SPOs to effectively engage with employers, and it involves change coming from employers. We and involve more research to understand that. 3, as Julie has mentioned, we need more pilot testing as the resources can be effectively and equitably used. We know that we're researchers, and so it's a little bit in our self-interest to say that, but we do truly believe that learning from evidence-based approaches and then implementing those changes leads to better programming and that flexibility that Julie mentioned to allow for continuous improvement. And then again, maybe a little plug for research, building this culture of research and evaluation in the sector requires both capacity building. We're not saying that service providers should become experts in evaluation. That's not where their advantage is, obviously, but learning by doing can be achieved through collaborations with research organizations, for example, SRDC, but also universities, involvements in pilot projects, and participation in a community of practice. So the last thing I'll just show is a QR code for our website. So I shared the SRDC website in the chat. We also have a project website, which is here. The research is continuing, so there'll be updated numbers, for example, from what I presented earlier, and we've done some other data collection since. We're presenting short reports. We have some videos briefly describing some of the research findings, so that can all be found on cpvrnw.ca. When the project started, it was Visible Minority Newcomer Women, not Racialized, so that's the acronym in the website. For the website, and you can find lots of additional information. So, and also don't hesitate to reach out to either Julie or I right now in the Q&A or afterwards with questions. We're really happy to talk about this project. And I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Awesome. Yeah, that was so fantastic. Thank you, Kim and Julie. Actually, before we jump into the Q&A and before people have to run off back to work, I was just going to launch a quick evaluation survey for people to fill out. So it should be coming. There you go. Hopefully you can see it. Awesome. Well, folks are doing that. If you have questions for Julie and Kim, now's your chance.
I saw there was one in the chat. Actually, I thought maybe Julie could answer it. There's a better place to answer it than I am. Julie, did you see it?
I saw it. Let me just go back to it, though. I think it was on trauma-informed practices, but let me just go to make sure. I wonder if trauma was taken into account, especially for those who might have come from war-torn countries. That's a really good question. So the models weren't specifically designed to be trauma-informed practices. They do have many similarities with the trauma-informed approach, but given that service providers, so all the service organizations who delivered this work regularly with newcomers of all backgrounds, so they are used to working with different clients. So yes and no I would say, is the answer here. This was designed in 2018. If we were to design it again today, I think there would be probably a bit more of a focus on trauma-informed approaches in the design of the models. Kim, did you want to add anything to that?
Nice. Yeah.
No, I would maybe just add that there were a lot of referrals made to other types of services, including counseling services, actually to temporary housing if it was required by participants. So it was a very holistic approach that was taken by service providers. Yeah.
Nice. Cindy, you have a question.
Hi everyone. My name is Cindy. Quite new in Calgary. Currently an international student at the U of C, studying social work. So I'm really not sure if I am allowed to join this meeting, but because I was
Yes.
at the Immigrant Service Calgary office, and I really was exploring options for newcomers, and I was told, okay, so our services are for PR holders and refugee asylum seekers. And so I'm sorry, but if you want any more information, you can get that on our website. So I did, and I signed up for your newsletter. And then I just got an email that, okay, there was this webinar, and then I registered. I was hoping if I didn't qualify, maybe I would have got an information that I did not, but here I am. And so it's been a very impactful meeting, and I'm really glad that I joined because I got a lot of information that I need for school and all that. And I wanted to know if there are other ways that people like us students who are new, there are opportunities that we can assess, and then also if there are like volunteer opportunities for students.
Yeah, Cindy, maybe if you want to send me an email, I'll just pop my
That would be
email in the
great.
chat.
I would really like that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
I see there's another question in this chat. Could you explain about the English-French language skill in Beyond Employment? Does that mean you provide English and French classes to participants or clients? So none of the models explicitly included language training. Uh, but some was incorporated. So for example, Model C, which was the sector-specific model, had one of the service providers had a language coach who assisted in the sector-specific or employment language that they would need to work in senior care. So there was some language training made available that was very employment-specific, but participants may have been referred to language courses by the service providers if that was deemed necessary for their specific employment goals, whatever that may be. But when I was mentioning those sort of those maybe unexpected results for confidence in English or French language at the time of the follow-up surveys for participants compared to the comparison group, I was just saying that maybe one explanation for why comparison group members improve more in English than their confidence in English, at least, than program group members was because maybe they, instead of taking the program, took some English language training. But we don't know that for sure. It was just a possible hypothesis. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Nice. Awesome. Are there any more questions? Well, I think if that's everything, then we'll just send a big thank you back to Kim and Julie, and thank you all for attending. Don't forget to sign up for the next Lunch and Learn. They're at the last Thursday of the month, every month, and I think we might be chatting about the challenges and unique experiences of rural and small city settlement with Dr. Julie Drolet from our own Faculty of Social Work. So yeah, that's coming up in October, and then November, where we have Dr. John Shields from York University, who will be talking about the limits of resiliency in the neoliberal government context. And his new edited volume, we're going to be sharing some information about a book launch that they recently published and that you can attend, as well as kind of hearing about some of the challenges of working in nonprofits. So I imagine that this one might be collective therapy for those of us working in nonprofit. and looking forward to that chat. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. And I think I just have one more question if you want to stay on. It's a technical, researchy question. So if folks want to leave, then they can do that. But so yeah, oh, we got one more question, I think.
Hello.
Honey, yeah, hi.
Hello, guys. Sorry, I was out and I just came, and I was
Please.
wondering. I had a question about. By the way, I loved the information you provided. It was eye-opening, and you mentioned intersectionality in your presentation several times, and I just was wondering if did you have clients with disability in the sample you had during this project, and what were the challenges specifically when it comes to the individualized approach or the group-based approaches? I would love to hear your insight in this aspect, if you don't mind.
Just trying to figure out which one of us will answer this question. Julie, do you want to?
Yeah, so in the survey, if I'm not mistaken, we have a question on if people have a disability. I don't believe that the sample was big enough for us to do any analysis, right, Kim? I don't think there's anything there specifically. It hasn't come up really from service providers as a specific group, given that the overall group was racialized newcomer women.
Maybe I'll just add that, as Julie mentioned, because the pilot shifted quite early on to virtual delivery, it did make it much more accessible for some people with disabilities, also for people caring for young children, for many different people. But service providers were also aware that it may have made it more difficult for some people due to maybe a different disability, or because of access to internet, or their knowledge of the use of computers or technology. So they really tried, I think, to customize the models as much as they could for individuals, and also looked for workplaces that they thought would be a good fit for participants, and would be inclusive and welcoming to racialized newcomer women, and if someone had a disability. But as Julie said, the sample was actually quite small.
Okay, thank you.
And I've put Kim and mine's email in the chat. If people have questions, feel free to email us. We'll respond certainly. I believe there was another hand up.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, is that me?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. This is an amazing presentation. My name is Yared from the Faculty of Social Work. Thank you. It was quite a great learning opportunity. One question that I have is, has there been any disaggregation of the data based on place of origin? The reason is, certain communities have, significant proportion of, some of the adverse outcomes, be it racism or access to, opportunities. It can be traced back to a certain, patterns of, demographic kind of groups. So does the data that you have provide that? Because relative to the total population, I'm just using an example, for example, the Black population, is there over-representation of the Black population, or versus what kind of pattern do you see based on place of origin? Thank you.
Kim, I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one we've actually been having as a team right now. So any thoughts that you might have are welcome as well. So initially what we had decided, so we do have the data, we have country of origin and ethnicity. Originally we had decided that we would not look at differences across ethnicities or country of origin because we didn't want to compare the labor market outcomes of Black racialized women to, other racialized women, for example. And we came back to that recently of whether or not we actually should, and specifically for Black participants. And there's not necessarily agreement within our team on that, so we haven't done it just yet. I recently sat in on a really good workshop on race in data from the BC. I cannot recall, but anyway, the BC. Jeff's nodding. Maybe he was there. BC government's race and data advisory committee, something, which made me think a lot about, what is the purpose? So if we did do that, what actionable learnings or policies would we be interested in, and is it valuable? Like not just out of curiosity, I would like to know, but what value could that add? And so we're still debating. So yeah, thoughts are welcome.
But just to add, the value proposition, particularly getting that kind of data, is around programming, because you made a good presentation around building capacity, unique, person-centered care. If that's the kind of service delivery modalities the agencies are using, could that help in customizing programming? Because certain organizations are coming up catering for certain populations from a specific region, rather than the broad brush of service provision by immigrant serving organization, because some of the needs are very complex and place of origin had an impact in terms of trauma or, let's start, let's say for kids in terms of, the academic accomplishments. So that the data might be really helpful around programming and customization of services. That's why I was asking. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, we definitely have to think about it. I think the one, just briefly, and then I'll end, the one service provider who offered the program in French, their clients were largely from Francophone West Africa, vast majority. And so their program was the one probably most catered to a similar, to individuals from, bordering countries who had immigrated to Canada, with some outliers, but that would have been the one program I would say that largely recruited and provided programming to Black Francophone newcomers.
Nice. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I'm just noticing now that we are right at 1:02 in Alberta. So if you need to leave now feel free. So my one question was whether or not the surveys you used, you kind of drew from validated measures, or yes, you did. And then I know one of the big problems is moving from employment. Employment is one thing, but being able to achieve a job within the person's background. What kind of question did you use, and where did you draw that one from? Because I'm trying to do some analysis on that and kind of bumping my head up. So.
I mean, I think Julie and I both noted that validated because it's an important question, not necessarily because all of the questions were validated. We have a SRDC has a lot of experience in similar questionnaires, and so and our questions often come initially validated from Statistics Canada, although some questions that are validated from Statistics Canada sometimes at some points may later on be shown to have some problems, and so there's always those limits. But for example, career adaptability measures, we had scales. We validated each factor in those scales, and then created aggregates. For example, for the employment, we had 3 questions on whether or not the employment was commensurate. It was whether or not, I could send you Jeff the exact wording and the options, but basically whether or not the employment they had used their education
Okay.
that they had. We also had one on whether or not the job posting that they had gotten required their highest level of education. Asked, to what extent does their current job use their experience prior to arriving in Canada, and the options were, I think, like a lot, not so much, that kind of thing. But I could get you the exact wording. And then we had a combination like that we created afterwards that their job is commensurate with both their education and their experience based on those
Nice.
And Jeff, just in previous project, we've also asked like the knock code of their
Okay.
previous experience and like what their profession was, and then compared it to the knock code. I don't know if you're familiar with knock codes, but like all the jobs in Canada.
Yeah.
So all the jobs in Canada are categorized.
Yeah.
And the numbers just mean like different things. The category of the job and sometimes it's the sector, and then the level of skill that you need with the job. So using that, we were able to compare it to the level of education, for example, or but it gets really complicated. And for us, it's always a balance of burden on participants and
for sure,
and the research that we get. So there's different ways that we've done it. The questions that Kim spoke about are not from validated scales, right, Kim? I don't think. But yeah, it's always a challenge, and we're looking more into that now, into making sure that we use the best scales and the best questions. So with this project, we're able to test our own questions as well to see which are working and which aren't. So yeah, we're changing.
Yeah, we have the one that I'm working with is kind of a multi-part question, but it's are you like unemployed or looking for work, part-time, full-time, and self-employed, or self-employed full-time? And then within, if you click full-time, is it in the area that you were trained in or your previous experience? I forget the exact wording. So I would like to come up with like I had played around with like creating just a single measure, integrating it all, or a single scale, but well, yeah, I need to find a citation or something like that or so trying to pick your brain.
I think actually in our report, it's a very long report on our website, the 1 year outcomes report, but if you control F for commensurate employment, I think we actually have the question in there.
Oh, nice. Okay.
That you could cite. If not, you can just reach out to us and.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Yeah. I've spent a little bit of time on Google, but since you're here, I thought I'd pick your brain.
For sure.
That's wonderful.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.